If I came up to you and asked, when will you retire? What would you say? 65? Never? I don't know. A recent YouGov poll found that 20% of people between the ages of 25 to 35 either thought they would never retire or just didn't know the answer. For me, there's always been two narratives that exist around retirement. On one hand, it feels like there's loads of people retiring early, exiting the workforce in their 50s or even earlier, just living their best lives. Then on the other side, there's this growing trend of people needing to work their whole lives, unable to leave the workforce because they can't afford to. But is that actually the case? This report from the IFS would say maybe, but not for the reasons that you might expect. I want to run you through this report and its findings, because if you don't ask yourself the question, when will I retire, someone else will decide for you, and you probably won't like the answer.
Somebody has to pay for these pension rises, and it's going to be working people.
What is retirement for you exactly?
This is an important question, and one we have to start with. What is retirement? Most people would say it's when they reach the age at which they get state pension, but that isn't it. In the UK, your state pension is not means tested, so you can receive it while still working. Okay, so maybe you're retired when you've left the workforce and no longer looking for a job. But that doesn't work either. People leave the workforce for all sorts of reasons. I mean, consider Neil Buchanan. I often find myself considering Neil Buchanan. I know you do too. He was the man that made kids across the UK believe they could do anything with a salt shaker and some bed sheets. His show ran from 1990 until 2007, and then it stopped. And so did Neil's time in the spotlight. Besides a minor appearance on Celebrity Juice, a need to once confirm that he is not Banksy, and more recently letting everyone know he isn't dead after a rumour circulated online that he died of an heart attack. I made one of those up, I'll let you decide which. But search online and plenty of people want to know what happened to Neil. He's 67 today, so past the age of so-called retirement, but he was 50 when he seemingly disappeared, just in an instant, and the world thought that Neil had vanished. Do you think Neil would have said that he retired at 50, or was there something else going on? This is the point. Retirement is not an age, a destination, or even an amount of money. It's a label we give ourselves where we identify as being out of the workforce permanently. Anything prior to this, where we're out of the workforce, but not looking for a job, but still don't identify as retired, is called economic inactivity. You might say that when Neil put down the paper mache,
Ta-ra! Ta-da!
he became economically inactive. And he is not alone. He's got this weird head thing that he talks to all the time.
I just have to admire the view from my living room window.
But economic inactivity in the UK is becoming a huge problem. How best can I show you this?
What you need is one of these. A sponge frame.
This orange line shows the percentage of people at each age group who identify as retired, who are not in paid work at all. That's your proper, I don't need to work anymore because here's one I made earlier, retirement. First of all, let's just acknowledge that the amount of people who say they're done working at 50 is next to nothing. It's only post 55 that the trend kicks upwards, and this is the age that many can access their private pensions at the minute. And only after the age of 64 do more than 50% of an age group identify as retired. Neil checked out right here. He did that because he sold the rights to Art Attack for 14 million quid. But let's just ignore that, and let's now look at the economic inactivity measure. The IFS defines this as over a certain age, say 50, who are not in paid work or actively seeking work. I'll just stick that on this side of the desk for a second. So they don't identify as retired, but they state that they're out of work for reasons like poor health or the need to care for family. This is a very big group of people, especially in the 50 to 60 range as shown by the green line here. This table would make you believe that for men it's as much as 10% of the population over 50, shown by this purple band, and for women it's as high as 15 to 20%. This economic inactivity makes our ageing population problem even worse, as a large portion of the pre-retirement workers are not in the workforce. The UK government will need to address this. And remember I said, if you don't decide when you want to retire, someone else will decide for you. From the perspective of policymakers, most would probably desire higher employment rates both before and after state pension age. This generates higher tax revenues and less call on the state for financial support. When it comes to this idea of early retirement, let's say early to mid-50s, we can see there is no meaningful trend there. The biggest trend of recent years, and the one that younger generations should at least have an eye on but probably prepare for, is a high chance of economic inactivity in their 50s due to external factors. How many people in their 20s, 30s, 40s consider that at 50 they may be forced out of the workforce due to family or their own health? And while I'm sure there are plenty of reasons people leave the workforce that are not related to this, you just have to consider that the IFS is telling us that 1 in 10 males and an even higher percentage of women at 50 are not in the workforce. The government will react to this by either incentivising those who are out of the workforce to get back into it, or by keeping people who are already in the workforce in it for longer to compensate, by, for example, raising the age at which we can access state and private pensions. So how can you retain control in both circumstances then? First of all, you can consider insurance. I'll make a video in the coming weeks about how getting lamped in the face on a night out changed my approach to protecting myself and my family. If you don't know what happened, TLDR it was a random assault by a complete stranger. He was caught and there was plenty of witnesses, so I guess you would call that a not very smart attack. But insurance and rubbish jokes aside, you also need retirement savings that allow flexibility over access. The most obvious way to do this is through a stocks and shares ISA, say. I leave a list of all the ones I use in the description of every video. But, to be clear, most people watching this video, a pension is likely the best place for you to save from a numbers perspective. But for me, the flexibility of an ISA gives me more control and certainty. So if something like me needing to exit the workforce at 50 did happen, the data suggests there's a 1 in 10 chance that might happen. I have this pot of money that I can access to bridge the gap between when I leave and accessing any pensions. Early retirement in this country is a goal for many that few appear to achieve. Economic inactivity is a consideration few make that many appear to be forced to live with. I think we're focusing as a nation on a dream outcome and not preparing for the worst outcome. It's just something to consider maybe. Let's now look at the other side of this and question how many people are working past state pension age. Before we get into that, let me tell you about today's video sponsor, The Daily Upside. The Daily Upside is a completely free daily newsletter sent straight to your email inbox. In a world of sensational finance media where clickbait titles are designed to sponge up views, The Daily Upside, in my opinion, stands out for their high-quality, impartial journalism. The newsletter is written by finance professionals, and you can really tell. No clickbait or nonsense here, just really interesting short articles that give you the detail you need. I really enjoyed this article about Microsoft's recent patent filings for an AI that responds with the correct level of emotion. So I guess if I shout at it, it shouts back. What if I flirt with it? Am I the only person who says please and thank you to AI when I use it? One day when Skynet goes live, it will remember who was polite. Anyway, the best thing about the Daily Upside is it's completely free. No upsell, no paywalls, nothing. All you have to do is bang in your email using the link in my description and you're done. And if you don't like it, you can always unsubscribe.
What I've used here is ordinary scouring sponges.
I scoured high and low for the sponges to make this one, but I think the results are brilliant. I'm sorry. Over the last 20 years, the amount of people continuing to work beyond the age of 66 has been increasing significantly. The green bars are 2002 and the blue are 2018. The same pattern can be observed for the older age group, 70 to 74. Again, green is 0203, blue more recently. It's at this point my preconceived biases kick in, and I'm sat here going, well, lack of pension savings and financial education, plus less generous pension schemes nowadays means that more people need to work longer as they haven't saved enough. Well, it is noticeable that employment rates at ages 66 to 69 and 70 to 74 have increased almost across the board. The most notable exception being the poorest fifth of the population. That's this group on the chart. Maybe it's because this group have access to support in the form of benefits, but it's still interesting that 15% of the wealthiest groups studied continue to work past the age of 70, and nearly 1/3 of the wealthiest continue to work directly after state pension age. DeGesser 2018 found that only around 1/3 of those working after the state pension age did so for self-declared financial reasons, compared to 2/3 who declared that they reported that they were still in paid work because they enjoyed working, or because they want to keep active and fit. The IFS study found that men, especially married men, more educated people and people without a disability are more likely to work past state pension age, suggesting that if you're fitter and healthier and wealthier, you're much more likely to delay retirement. My granddad always used to say that when all of his mates retired, they died. And my mum recently retired, took 6 months off and then re-entered the workforce because she realised that she wanted to. A trend exists that people are working longer, and I think that that will continue. And a part of it will be a result of necessity due to a lack of retirement savings. The generation being studied in this IFS report is one that has benefited from generous pensions and rising property prices. Generations coming through the system at the minute don't have those, and I think more people will struggle to fund their retirements as a result. We'll look at some research on that in a second. But I also think a large part of the population find value and meaning in the work that they do, and they just want something to get up and do every day. For me, that's getting out of bed and making sponge frames. Prior to Art Attack, Neil was in a heavy metal band called Marseille. They had some moderate success, they even toured with Judas Priest. Neil left the band in the 80s, and after selling Art Attack, he then rejoined the band from 2008 to 2017. You could say, well, he made millions and then he retired and he was just living his dream. But he left the band again, not to retire, but because he was doing consultancy work for children's TV. This is a man who at 50 years old sold his company for £14 million. He does not need to work. It's often the case that people work for the love of it, and it's not the need for money. And the richer and healthier you are, the more likely you are to continue to work into old age. So when do people actually retire? And when can you expect to retire? Let's start with average figures first of all, which I hope you've seen from the data we've covered already. Mean absolutely nothing, but they're still pretty interesting. The OECD compile a table where they look at different countries across the globe listing the official retirement age, and then they list the average age someone exits the labour market. Think of it as like, this is the state pension age, and then this is the age that people actually stop working on average. Topping the list here is Iceland in terms of official retirement age, 67, but the UK is not far behind that, and it will rise to 67 for those born after April 1960. The youngest official retirement age on here is Saudi Arabia, listed at 47.
Yeah, oil.
I did some digging on this, didn't find any oil unfortunately, but I did find that the youngest age you could possibly retire on full benefits in Saudi Arabia is 47, but the age ranges from 47 to 59. The highest on the list of people to leave the workforce on average are Indonesian women at 69.2 years old. The UK on the whole list does pretty well, with an effective age of around 63 for both men and women on average. The OECD's overall average is 63.8 for men and 62.4 for women. In the UK, men on average retire slightly younger than this, and women are over that age. If we look at the trend of the OECD overall average for retirement age from the 70s until now, we can see the same pattern for both men and women. Declines in the effective rate of retirement, and now that trend is reversed, as people are continuing to work for longer across the Western world on average. These, of course, are today's figures and ones from the past, so an interesting question is, when can people my age or younger expect to retire? Will we see a continued increase in the age that people retire? Or will we see another reversal of this trend, so we start to see the average age at which people retire across the OECD decline? Emerson and O'Brien released this paper in 2002 where they looked at the indicators of people continuing to work, and the biggest factor that they found, unsurprisingly, was an increase in the state pension age. The state pension continues to be an important milestone and income for all demographics, richest to poorest. For those above state pension age, the state pension makes up 70% of the income for the lowest income fifth, 45% for the middle fifth, and even 20% for the highest income fifth. So any rise in the state pension age will of course push back millions of people's ability to retire when you consider just how important it is in terms of total income. Back to Emerson and O'Brien again. So they found that amongst women, increasing the state pension age from 65 to 66 caused rises in employment that were at least as large as when state pension age went from 60 to 61. With state pension age expected to hit 68 by mid-2040, you would expect that this trend continues upwards on average. This has been reflected in the expectations of the general public on when they think they'll be able to retire. You can see here the expected age of retirement between men and women aged 40 to 54 over the years. There's been this sharp decline in the amount of people who think that they'll be able to retire by 65 or even 60. Below 60 has declined as well, but not nearly as much as the other lines. And then there's been this sharp rise in the amount of people who think they'll retire beyond 66. At the start of the video, I said to you, if you don't ask yourself, when will I retire, then someone else will answer the question for you. In the wake of higher economic inactivity in people in their 50s and the growing burden of an ageing population and all the problems that puts on the economy, policymakers will attempt to find solutions to reduce the burden on the state. And that won't necessarily come from getting people who are not in work into work. It may just be that they keep those who work in work longer because it's much easier to do. We've seen an example of this in recent years already. Rather than the biggest employment increases being among low-income wealth individuals who are most reliant on state benefits, it has occurred from middle wealth people instead. I think there's lots we can all take away from this research and the findings. First of all, as a viewer of this channel, I want the impact my work has on your life really to be in the main the ability for you to choose your own destiny and to have control over your time. Clearly, there is a big problem here of high economic inactivity amongst people in their 50s. You can look to protect yourself, as I've said, against that through relevant insurances and having flexible savings that can bridge the gap between, say, your early 50s and the age at which you can access both state and private pensions. Remember, the age at which you can access private pensions tends to increase in line with state pensions just 10 years before. If we then expect state pension age to be at 68 by 2040, you should be assuming that private pensions will be at 58 by then. I want to know that if something happens to me at 50, I can bridge that gap comfortably. It won't derail my long-term savings goals or impact my quality of life. I can spend my days making sponge frames. Early retirement is a nice idea not many achieve. Being forced out of the workforce for health and family reasons is a threat 1 in 10 seem to currently face. As the NHS faces the increased burdens of extra demand from an ageing population, I can't see that improving either. As the NHS gets stretched further and further, I can see access to immediate medical care being limited or increasingly behind a paywall. I want to be able to fund that if it's required. Another takeaway from all of this is, if you're closer to retirement and you're worried that you've not got enough saved, just learn from those in front of you. Millions of retirees with enough to stop who continue to engage in the workforce just on their own terms. They have enough money and they don't stop. They continue to get up every day, step out into the workforce, they create, they make and engage with the economy, earning well beyond state pension age. Life doesn't stop at 65 and neither does your ability to save money. If you don't believe me, just watch this video right here. I'll show you it's not only possible to build a great retirement in later life, but it might be optimal. Honestly, not easy this. What an anticlimax. Knew I should have done how to instead. That Fred Dinage, he's clearly got some stories.